All hail the power of Jesus' name. Let angels prostrate fall. Let angels prostrate fall. Bring forth a royal diadem and crown him, 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 and crown him Lord of all. Ye chosen seed of Israel's race, ye ransom from the fall, ye ransom from the fall. Hail him who saves you by his grace, and crown him, 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 and crown him Lord of all. Let every kindred, every tribe on this terrestrial ball, on this terrestrial ball, to him all majesty ascribe, and crown him, 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 and crown him Lord of all. Oh, that with yonder sacred throng we at his feet may fall, we at his feet may fall. We'll join the everlasting song, and crown him, 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 and crown him Lord of all.
Minds at rest immediately. This is not a sermon about giving. True worship. And it's based on that lovely little story that I'm sure you've heard before. And I like that story because it throws a great deal of light on the way that things were done in religion in the days of Jesus, and also light on the social conditions that existed at that time. We read that Jesus was sitting over against the treasury. You'll find the same story mentioned in Luke chapter 21. Now let me explain something here before we proceed any further. The treasury was a part of the court of the women. Now, you remember that there was first of all the court of the Gentiles, where anybody could walk, the courtyard. And then there was a wall, and the wall had a statement made upon it that any Gentile passing beyond this point was himself responsible for his death, which would surely follow, because Gentiles were forbidden to proceed beyond that wall. On the other side of the wall, the first court was the court of the women, and Jesus had been there teaching. There had been an official delegation come upon him, a delegation of the priests and the members of the temple guard, who were wanting to know why he was teaching in the courts of the temple, not having received official permission to do so, because anyone teaching there really had to seek permission from the priesthood. Now Jesus had not only refuted them in argument, but he'd made certain statements which had so angered them that we read that at that very hour they wanted to kill him. But they were afraid to do so because of the people. Now Jesus is sitting there contemplating in the court of the women over against the treasury. Now the treasury was a part of that courtyard where there were 13 chests or boxes, each one having a funnel. You've seen the old-fashioned gramophone horns, haven't you? The great horns that used to come out of the gramophone boxes. Well, there were horns like that, or trumpets as they called them, on these 13 boxes. And the open end of the trumpet faced the people as they passed to and fro on their way in and out of the temple. Now, let me point out that this is the time of the Passover, and the temple, which was normally an extremely busy place anyway, people used it as a thoroughfare to get from one part of the city to the other. But this was especially busy, being the time of the Passover, and people were arriving from all over the Roman world for this great celebration. Every section of Jewish society was represented there. Poor people came, rich people came, all nationalities came. It was an extremely busy place, and Jesus is sitting there. And the people filed by the boxes, and they cast in their contributions. People gave money, says Mark. Some people gave much money. And then this woman comes along that we read about in the story. Well, we'll talk about her in a moment. But you see, these boxes were labeled. I might mention this in passing. These boxes were labeled with the purpose to which the money would be placed that was cast into the box. They threw their money into the trumpet. It slid down into the security of the box below. And Jesus is sitting there, meditating. And with that amazing intuition that was so evident in the life of Jesus on numerous occasions, he looked up just in time to see a poor widow. Both Mark and Luke call her a poor widow, but in reality there's no need to call her a poor widow unless it's to emphasize the extremity of her poverty, because widows in those days were invariably poor. But this poor widow comes along and she casts into the treasury 2 small copper coins, 2 lepta, that's what they were called. And according to the priesthood, that was the smallest amount that anyone was allowed to give into the treasury. I say she was a very poor woman anyway, because widows were extremely poor. Once the breadwinner had gone, there was no way in which a woman could earn a living. You know, they didn't have Social Security in those days. They had no kind of pension scheme for widows. There were no widow's pension or anything like that. And there was no way in which you could earn enough money to keep herself. She might make a few pennies here and there by doing odd jobs, but for the most part, a widow lived on the poverty line in those days. And this poor widow, this woman comes along, and she casts into the treasury the smallest Jewish coins that were allowed to go in. And Jesus looks up in time to see her. You know, I think that woman would have been mortified if she felt that somebody was actually watching her giving. She came along unobtrusively, without any ostentation, any show. She didn't make any magnificent gesture as some of the rich people did, because, you know, some people came and they gave especially large amounts at that particular time. It was the Passover time, and it was quite customary for them to allow people to see how much money they were placing into the treasury. That was one of the things that Jesus spoke about, didn't he? He talked about the Pharisees standing on the street corners and as they dispensed their benevolence, their charity, they wanted everybody to see how extremely generous they were. And the rich would come along to the temple, and with a magnificent show, they would make their gift to the treasury. But this woman comes along furtively, almost stealthily, and she casts into the treasury 2 small copper coins. I tell you, she would have been absolutely horrified if she knew who it was who watched her giving that day. But Jesus did see. And of course, well, is it any different today, really, when you think about it? Is there anything that the omniscient one doesn't see? Is there anything he doesn't know about us as we sit in this congregation this morning? Is there anything about your life or mine of which Jesus is unaware? He sees all, he knows all. And furthermore, he knew that this woman had given all that she had. Have you ever thought about this? How did Jesus know how much she gave? 2 small coins. How did he know there were 2? That's what he says. And how did he know that she had given all that she had? You know, there are 2 Greek words for poverty. And they come from the same family, but they mean very different things. The first word is the word hysteresis. Hysteresis. And that means poverty. It means want. It means to be poor. The other word is hysterema. Hysterema. And it means need. It means deprivation. It means shortage. Now, Jesus does not say that this woman gave out of her poverty, that she was a poor woman and she gave out of her poverty. It's even more extreme than that. Jesus says she gave even when she was in need. In fact, the word literally means that when that woman had placed into that treasury box the 2 small Jewish coins that she had, she didn't have anything left with which to take care of her needs for that day. She didn't have anything. Now, of course, I suppose when Jesus said this woman has given all that she had, the priest would have disagreed when he said she has given more than all of them together. And I've no doubt that the rich people would have been rather indignant to be told this woman had given more than they had given. And I suppose the financiers, if they had computers or calculators in those days, would have got out their calculators and they would have proved to you that she gave only a fraction of the great gifts these other people were giving. But you see, Jesus has his own method of assessing, of evaluating. And that's what it's all about. Jesus looks at this woman and he sees what she's given. He looks at the rich people. He sees that many are giving much. The word that is used is the word panta, apolla rather, which means much. She gave panta, which is all. And Jesus says, yes, they have given much, but they're rich people. And what they've given really makes no impression upon their wealth. They can afford to give what they have given. This woman, on the other hand, has given all that she has. She didn't have anything left after she had given with which to take care of the needs of the day. Now, that's quite something, isn't it? I think there's some pretty obvious lessons to be learned from this story, and as I've already promised you, it's not a story on giving. I don't intend to go down that road. But bear with me while I make this one point before I proceed. That Jesus sees, that Jesus knows, that Jesus evaluates. Let me ask you a question. Why did that widow do what she did on that occasion? What was her motivation? Because after all, that is really what matters. It is motive that matters. Always. It's not always what you do. It is why you do it. And what we do is evaluated by the Lord according to our motive. Now, I'll say this. That woman might have found 100 reasons for not doing what she did. She might have had a pretty good reason for not giving anything at all when you consider her circumstances. But she gave all that she had. And I want to know why. That's the question that arises in my mind. In what frame of mind did that woman come to the temple that morning? Why did she come? Well, she came in the spirit of worship. She came to worship. And that's really what it's all about. It's about worship. It's about devotion. It's about love. For whatever reason others came that morning, That woman came with a heart full of love for the Lord Jesus, full of love for God. And the Lord Jesus sees that, and He assesses that. She came in the spirit of true worship. And I suspect that some hard-headed and calculating people might have said, well, she behaved rather extravagantly and rashly in behaving the way that she did. She didn't feel like that, I'm sure. She came to worship. And she came out of love. Do you remember the time when a ruler came to Jesus with the great question, Lord, which is the greatest commandment of the law? And Jesus gave him an answer that consisted of a double commandment. He said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and thy neighbor as thyself. Notice the all. Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy mind, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength. To worship God with all your heart means emotionally. To worship God with all your mind means intelligently and thoughtfully. To worship God with all your soul means there must be a spiritual dimension to your worship. To worship God with all your strength means you must worship God with the energy of your being. And so there's got to be nothing casual about our worship, nothing half-hearted. It's got to be wholehearted worship if it's going to be accepted by God. And that is what this widow was doing. This magnificent, extravagant, reckless, if you want to call it that, reckless gesture was evidence of this woman's wholehearted devotion, dedication, and worship of God. Now, of course, there are some things you can do without giving them your wholehearted attention. And there are some things that you do sometimes that aren't worth your wholehearted attention. But worship is not one of them. And I want to suggest this morning that if our worship is to mean anything either to God or to ourselves, it has to be wholehearted. It has to take the concentration of our being if it's going to mean anything. When we give, or when we pray, or when we sing, or when we participate, as our brethren have done today, in the celebration of the Lord's Supper, we have to concentrate on what we're doing if it's going to be worthwhile. Because that's the only way it's going to be pleasing to God. You see, what I'm talking about, essentially, is preparation for worship. And I believe we need to prepare. Look at that woman, for example. Let me ask you a question. Think seriously about this. When that woman cast into that box everything that she had, her whole living, leaving herself without anything on which to live for the rest of the day, because I assure you that's what the word means, do you think she acted on impulse? Do you think she did it on the spur of the moment? I don't believe that. I can see that woman at home before she comes to the temple, and she's thinking about what she's going to do that day. Thinking very seriously of the consequences for her. She knows that once she's given her 2 lepta, she has nothing left over. But she makes the decision, and consequently when she comes to the temple, she is prepared to give, and she is prepared to worship. This was not impulse giving, brethren. It was predetermined giving. And I would claim that today it's impossible for us to worship satisfactorily unless we are prepared. There's got to be physical preparation. Let's begin. Jesus says, all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. Let's begin with the strength bit. You must be physically prepared. All your strength. Now, are we physically prepared for worship this morning? Is that how we feel? It doesn't always happen like that, you know. Here comes a brother into the assembly, and he flops into a seat, and he says, this is what's running through his mind. Boy, am I tired. What a week it's been. It's been a terrible week. And staying up half the night last night to watch the late night movie hasn't done me any good either. I don't know why I did it, because it was rubbish anyway. And I hope Frank's not got one of his long sermons this morning. Is he prepared? Is he here to worship God with all his strength? I hardly think so. It's so easy to come with that kind of disposition. Is he going to get much out of the service? Is he going to contribute much to the service? Is he going to be a blessing to others who are present in the service? Now, what is wrong? I know what's gone wrong in this case. Listen, you may think I'm meddling here, but I don't care. Because there's a new preacher coming. But I do not believe that it's possible for anyone to stay up half the night on Saturday night into the early hours of the Lord's Day. And I would urge you that this is the Lord's Day. It's the day that belongs to Him, not to you. And then come along on Lord's Day morning, refreshed and renewed and reinvigorated by the night's sleep, and worship God acceptably to bring to the Lord the strength of your being. You can't do it. And I maintain, and again you might say, well, this is just a hobby of yours. Okay, it is a hobby of mine, maybe. But I believe that I've got the authority of the Word behind me when I say this. I maintain that Christians ought to retire sufficiently early in the evening, or in the night anyway, to come along refreshed on the Lord's Day morning to make a contribution to the communal act of worship. I should hear more amens too. Because preparation is essential. Look, on the very basic level, preparation is essential to punctuality. Now, if people are habitually late for service, there's something gone wrong. Now, I know very well that anyone can be late sometimes. But if people are habitually late, it's evident to me that they haven't made the proper preparation. They haven't started out early enough. And I know, too, that sometimes we'll come along to service and we're not feeling on top of our form, as we might say. We might feel a little bit out of sorts. We can all get unwell, particularly at this time of the year when there are coughs and colds and sneezes and flu and whatever. Anyone can be like that. And you know, preachers know this. Preachers, believe it or not, preachers are people too. Really. And the preacher knows that he has something to do. And he comes along, he may not be feeling very well, but he doesn't think about that. He allows the message to take hold of him, and he forgets what's wrong, and he preaches in such a way that nobody knows there's anything wrong with him. He thrusts it out of his mind, you see. And we can do the same thing with lots of things that impinge upon our being. Come even when you're not feeling like it. Come prepared to worship. Come ready to worship. Come expecting to receive a blessing. Come to worship with heart and mind and soul and strength. And you will not go away empty. The Lord will bless you. Now, we have some brethren absent this morning who might well be here. And I suppose if you were to ask them, why didn't you come? I suspect they might say, well, I don't get anything out of the service. I've heard that, you know, in the course of my life. Oh, the service leaves me cold. I'll tell you why it leaves them cold. In many instances, it finds them cold. They come cold. And you know, the trouble is with coldness, it transmits itself. And if you come to a service and you're cold, then that affects other people around you. You lower the general temperature. and you're not a blessing to anybody. But if you come warm, if your heart is warm with the thought of worship, I love the passage. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet shall stand within thy gates, O Jerusalem. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Read Psalm 84. How amiable are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts. My soul thirsts, yea, longs for the living God. My heart and my flesh cry out. And this is a man who's not able to go for some reason. Maybe he's sick, maybe he's in exile, I don't know. But he knows what it's like. And he's remembering what it's like to worship God. And he describes the little birds that come flying in through the open windows and they make their nests under the very altar. The sparrows have found a nest where they may lay their eggs, where they may look after their young, even thine altars, O Lord of hosts. And he goes on to say, blessed are the men in whose hearts are the highways to Zion. He's talking about the men who've been that way so many times that the ways are inscribed on their hearts and they could find their way blindfolded. And he envies these people who are able to go there. Now that's the attitude you have in the New Testament and the Old Testament too. You find believers who were anxious to worship, and they came with hearts full of love and the desire to worship. And they came and they were a blessing to themselves and to other people. If you come along to the service and you leave and you're cold, and I mean a service which has been a blessing to other people that has left them warm, you need to look at yourself. There's something wrong somewhere. If we have the right spirit, if we come with our energy, if we come with our minds concentrating on our worship, we cannot leave without a blessing. That widow came prepared to worship, and consequently she gave one of the most famous contributions of which the world has ever heard, and one that will not be forgotten. And remember, Jesus says, with all your mind too. I believe really that true worship requires the concentration of your mind. It's so easy, isn't it? Even in a prayer, to let your mind wander off. And you forget what you've been talking about. Do you know you can even celebrate the Lord's Supper? Take the bread and take the fruit of the vine, make a contribution without really having worshipped, because you have done this merely as a formality, out of habit, simply because, well, you're expected to be here this morning and to do these things. We need to be thinking about what we do. Oh, when I sit there and I take the bread and the wine, it's not just that my hands touch the bread and the cup. It's that the emblems touch my heart, because they make me think of what the Lord has done for me. I go back to Calvary. I think of the blood that was shed for me there. I recognize that this is indeed the symbol of that body which bore my sins on the cross. I take that fruit of the vine as the blood which cleanses me, and I recognize that I'm not redeemed with corruptible things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without spot and without blemish. And I'm reminded of the fact that not the blood of beasts on Jewish altars slain could take away the guilt of sin or wash away the stain, but Christ, the heavenly Lamb, takes all our guilt away. A sacrifice of nobler name and richer blood than they. That's what we should be thinking about. When you take the bread and the cup, don't start fidgeting. Sometimes we're scared of silence in the service. We're scared of periods of quietness. If there is a lull in the service, then take the Word. Open the Scriptures. Read a few verses. For myself, I think of that wonderful passage, Psalm 103. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits, who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth thy diseases, who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who filleth thy mouth with good things. Well, if you think of a passage like that, in the quietness of your own contemplation, you can't leave this place cold. I know that sometimes the service doesn't go too well. Listen, I'm speaking plainly this morning. I've heard this congregation sing in an inspiring fashion 2 Wednesday nights ago when Brother Smalling spoke here. That was a marvelous spiritual feast. And you sang like canaries. You have canaries here. You sang like canaries. But brethren, I've sometimes heard you sing like canaries ready to fall off the perch. Because you don't open your mouths. Think about these things in the quietness of the silences that come into the service. When there's a lull there, think of praise, think of worship. Read through some of the words of the songs that we sometimes sing without thinking about, so that we know what we're singing. And you know, even if things don't go quite well in the service, you can still have a private time of devotion, because this is not just a communal act of worship when the body witnesses to the coming of the Lord. It is a private act of worship. You're able to worship personally. And you know, if you'll do that, you won't ever leave a service cold. And you won't have barbecued preacher for lunch or stewed song leader. You'll have a blessing. But again, the time has gone. According to this clock, it's 5:30. Hasn't the day gone quickly? Well, maybe that song is really appropriate. You know, why not tonight? Look, Jesus says, all of your heart and soul. That's essential. Have you ever been to an airport when people have been expecting the arrival of someone they love? They've waited for the plane to touch down. Have you seen the looks of intense anticipation, eager anticipation on their faces as they've waited and they've craned their necks to see the one they're looking for, the one they're waiting for. And then when they see him or her, how their faces light up with joy. It ought to be like that when we come along to services here. Listen, we've come along into the presence of the Creator. We have been knocking at heaven's door today. And we shouldn't come half-heartedly, dragging our feet, reluctantly, fulfilling another duty. But joy, with anticipation. And if we have the same spirit of expectancy as those people waiting for their friend to arrive by plane, we shall be blessed. As the hart panteth after the water brook, so panteth my soul after thee, O God, says the psalmist. And then the verse that our brother Roy dealt with on the Wednesday night, the end of Isaiah 40, marvelous passage. Comfort ye, my people. And the end of the passage, the end of that chapter says, even the youth shall faint and grow weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And that should be your experience when you come here each Lord's Day. 60 years ago, as a young boy, I went with friends to the Lake District in the north of England, the Wordsworth country, where Lake Derwentwater, Lake Windermere is. Beautiful country, the mountains and the lakes. And I learned a hymn that has remained with me all my life and has constantly been a source of blessing to me. It's in that songbook. It's 770. And I would suggest that when you come along, this might be a prayer on your lips. Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways. Reclothe us in our rightful mind. In purer lives thy service find, in deeper reverence praise. In simple trust, like theirs who heard beside the Syrian sea the gracious calling of the Lord, let us like them without a word rise up and follow thee. O Sabbath rest by Galilee, O calm of hills above, where Jesus knelt to share with thee the silence of eternity, interpreted by love. Drop thy still dews of quietness, till all our striving cease. Take from our lives the strain, the stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. That's a wonderful prayer with which to begin any time of true worship. If you're subject to the Lord's invitation, if you need restoration, if there's any way in which we can help you to be reconciled to God, if you need to become a Christian this morning by confessing your faith in Jesus and being baptized into Him to rise to walk in newness of life, one of the elders and I will be here at the front to greet you and to meet you. Let's stand to sing.
Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways. Reclothe us in our rightful mind, in purer lives thy service find, in deeper reverence praise. In simple trust like theirs who heard beside the Syrian sea the gracious calling of the Lord, let us like them without a word rise up and follow thee. O Sabbath rest by Galilee, O calm of hills above, where Jesus knelt to share with thee the silence of eternity, interpreted by love. Drop thy still dews of quietness, till all our striving cease. Take from our souls the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper, He amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe doth seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate. On earth is not his equal. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. Were not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. Dost ask who that may be? Christ Jesus it is He. Lord Sabaoth His name, from age to age the same, and He must win the battle. And though this world with demons filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed His truth to triumph through us. The Prince of Darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fail him.